Changing the mind, changing the mindset. Well, in order to change the mind, and we say, let's define what we mean by mind. What we mean by mind is a consciousness with thoughts in it. The consciousness with thoughts in it. Originally, the consciousness is pure, quiet. But because of our environmental conditioning and our past karma, the consciousness can be contaminated. Contaminated with lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, and envy. The more it's contaminated, it attracts those kind of thoughts into it. So if the consciousness has lust, it will attract those kind of thoughts into it. From lust comes anger and greed. From anger comes madness. From greed comes envy. From also illusion comes out of madness. From greed comes envy. So all of these negative traits or qualities pollute the consciousness. And the consciousness will attract those kind of thoughts from other places in the universe. So we're saying that all these thoughts always in the universe, they're energy, they have a certain frequency and a vibration. They're already in the universe. So the more we attract those thoughts into the consciousness, that's called the mind. So remember now, we said that the mind, what is commonly called the mind, is simply thoughts within the consciousness. So the consciousness has to be purified of all those negative thoughts. So we're saying that our Supreme Being has many, many names. Although it's within and beyond all names, it is within and beyond all names. So by calling out the name of Supreme Being, we can neutralize, purify the consciousness of those negative thoughts. We have one word in Gayatri, we call it the Bhargo Devasha Dimahi Dio Yo Naha Prachodayat. We have the purifier. That is Bhargo. Bhargo, the word Bhargo is a quality, a name of Supreme Being. It says Bhargo is the radiance, the spiritual effulgence, the light which bestows wisdom, the purifier of sins and ignorance. See, those thoughts make us do deeds that are harmful, deeds that are permeated with sins and ignorance of the self. So the name Bhargo is a name that purifies the consciousness of sins and ignorance. So the more the consciousness is purified of sins and ignorance, the less we do harmful deeds toward anyone, toward any living being. So to change the mind, we have to purify the consciousness, change or purify the consciousness. To the degree the consciousness is purified, that is the change. That is the change we want. But to try to make a change in the mind without purification is futile. So we have to engage in purification of the consciousness. And this is done, we say, by one of the yogas that we use for purification. It's called Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raj Yoga. Jnana Yoga is when we are gathering intelligence, gathering knowledge, scientific knowledge, because it can be understood or dissected or broken down or analyzed in a very systematic manner. The knowledge can be deconstructed and reconstructed. So Jnana Yoga is when we gather knowledge about who really am I. Am I this body? Am I the consciousness? Am I awareness? Or am I the intelligence which pervades and transcends the consciousness and the awareness? So this intelligence is a reflection, we say, of the omniscience of Supreme Being. That's pure intelligence of Supreme Being. So by calling out the name of Supreme Being, we're associating with Supreme Being. And by associating with the Supreme Being, the consciousness is further purified. So gathering knowledge about the Supreme. Who am I? Who is Supreme Being? What is suffering? What is the cause of suffering? And what is the way out of suffering? When we're gathering knowledge about this is called Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga. The next yoga after this, when we become devoted to gathering knowledge about the Supreme, this is called the Bhakti Yoga. It's devotional yoga. We're devoted to this truth. We're devoted to this science. We're devoted to this methodology of finding out who am I, what is my source, what is my relationship with the source, and how do we reawaken to the source. That's your Bhakti Yoga. The more we engage in the Bhakti, the more we overlap into what we call Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is when we're doing everything as an offering to the Supreme. Everything we do. We say all that we do, all that we offer, all that we give away, all the austerities that we perform, we do it as an offering to the Supreme. So when Ethiopia stretches forth his hands has an offering in it. So we're not asking the Most High to be our order supplier, asking the Most High to give us this or give us that. We're asking the Most High to accept our humble offering, So all that we do, all that we offer, all that we give away, all the austerities that we perform, it's an offering. So when we say offering, surrender, submission, service, they are synonymous in this context, in that we're doing everything as service, surrender, offering, or submission to the Supreme. What is the advantage of this? This helps us to always think about the Supreme. It helps us to associate with the Supreme, and this association is a purifying process. So after we've gone into the Jnana, the Bhakti, the Karma, then we enter what is called the Raja Yoga. The Raja Yoga is predominantly the meditation. So the meditation can consist of breathing techniques. It consists of calling out the name either alone or with the breathing technique. At a certain point, we can leave off the breathing techniques as well as the mantras. When we're calling out the name, that's called mantra yoga. It's meditation. At a certain point, we can leave that to the side and meditate on stillness and silence itself. As far as we know at this point, meditating on the stillness, the silence, is probably the highest meditation that we can do, meditating on the stillness. So all of this is purification. The more we're purified and come back to this divine intelligence, which is a direct channel from the supreme intelligence, omniscience. So we're saying whether we call it omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, these are qualities and attributes of the Supreme. Qualities and attributes of the Supreme. So if we're doing your mantra yoga, whatever name we're using, if we know that this name means that our Supreme is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, we're talking about the same name, because we're saying that this Supreme is within and beyond all names, all qualities, all attributes. So whatever name that we use for our meditation, if it has these qualities, if it means these three, and it's eternal, we're talking about the same thing. So association with the Supreme is the purification process. Questions?
So you're saying the best way to change your mindset or what you
To purify.
Purify by way of, how would you go about purifying?
But these four methods, this Jnana Yoga, the Bhakti Yoga, the Karma Yoga, and the Raj Yoga. Generally in the Western countries, people are doing Hatha Yoga, which is good physical exercise, but that's not the goal of yoga. The goal of yoga is God realization, whatever name. God is another name for Supreme Being. If we call it the Most High, whether we call it Allah, whether we call it Buddha nature, whether we call it Brahman, we call it the greatest spirit, the greatest awareness, the greatest supreme. There are many, many names for it, but it's beyond all names. It's within and beyond all forms, but it's beyond all forms. It's infinite, and actually, it's beyond all dualities. So it's beyond form and formlessness. We really can't even use a number to describe it. It's beyond all descriptions, so that it's beyond all dualities. Whether we have a form or formlessness, it's beyond form and formlessness. It's beyond all descriptions. So we can't really say that it's one. We can't say that, we could say it's one, we can say it's zero, but it's actually beyond numbers. And it's beyond zero, it's within and beyond zero. It's within and beyond one. Because if we trace this, all this material creation back to its origin, back to the subatomic particles, we see that this supreme intelligence pervades and transcends all the atoms and neutrons, electrons, the subatomic particles that make up these molecules that make up this so-called solidity here. So that this supreme intelligence pervades the space between subatomic particles, the most subtle. So it is the most subtle. That's pure intelligence. So it's here, we say it's here, before these, the horizons of cosmic manifestations. At the same time, it's small enough to pervade and transcend the space between subatomic particles. So it's smaller than the smallest and bigger than the biggest simultaneously. So we say it's not just great, because this is beyond compare. It is the greatest. So by associating with this through our spiritual practice, and our spiritual practice in essence is the Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and the Raj Yoga. And by this spiritual practice, we are associating with the Supreme. And by associating with the Supreme, we reawaken into the likeness of the Supreme again, which is supreme purity. So as our consciousness come back to that supreme stillness, that supreme purity, then you know we can just walk away. Then we've had a revolution in our ways of looking at the self. So the very beginning is to see the self differently. We see the self as a spirit. We're spirit, the most subtle spiritual essence of all of this. Actually, the quintessence, the spiritual quintessence, which is beyond form and formlessness, most subtle than the ether. Of course, and the ether is most subtle than the air. So we're talking about that which makes up what we call the self. The self is in quality one with the Supreme Being. So we are spirit. The Supreme Being is Supreme Spirit. We are pure. So to come back to reawaken to our original purity is the transformation, is the revolution that we must have in order to have a change of so-called mind.
Where do you begin? Say you have not experienced this before, you have had the thing with experiencing yoga or anything. Where do you begin?
Well, the word yoga actually means yoke. Yoke. So the goal of yoga is yoke or union with your Supreme Being. It's not a matter of going somewhere else, it's a matter of coming back to yourself in this present moment. So you know the presence is all we really have, coming back to your presence, your vibratory presence. In fact, the essence of being is most subtle than any vibration, you see? It's most subtle in the vibration. So how to begin to get knowledge of the self? You start naturally, like a baby seeks knowledge. It's natural for us to seek knowledge. So when you have a baby, you got to watch that baby to be sure the baby doesn't put his finger into the electrical socket or pull some vessels over on itself, or because the baby is naturally inclined toward getting knowledge. See? So to begin this process, you want to get knowledge of who am I? So you analyze philosophies and religions. We don't just stop at one source. The goal is get knowledge of the self. Who am I and who in the world is supreme being? What is the nature of the self? Just naturally. So we study it. So we say our spiritual practice consists of the prayer, study, sacrifice, that service. Prayer, sacrifice, service, right association. Try to associate with those you consider wise. Those who you see seem to have more knowledge of the self than you have. Even if we can't get it personally, physically, get it from your books, get it from your videotapes, but try to have the association with the wise. And we say the truly wise are those who have knowledge, observation, and experience and reflection of what is the self. So that is the beginning. Investigating. Seeking knowledge. Seek knowledge, we say, from the womb to the tomb. But seek knowledge about what is the greatest knowledge we can find? Knowledge of the self. Without having knowledge of the self, we might have all kinds of book knowledge. But without knowledge of the self, we just like a dried leaf blown hither and thither by the wind. A dried leaf blowing hither and thither by the wind can be crushed by anything. It can be wetted and disintegrated by anything. Okay? But get knowledge. Seek knowledge. Get knowledge of self. And when we have that knowledge and we really tried that knowledge by experience, everyday life, then we can have wisdom about this. So we continue to grow, continue to awaken, because the source of all knowledge is the self. The self, one of the qualities of the self is omniscience. So we say our supreme being is the source of all omniscience, the source of all purity, the source of all righteousness, the source of all love, the source of all peace, the source of all truth. Our self is the source of that. Anyone who's done any books has really drawn on the self for that knowledge. So knowledge of the self, we say, is the greatest knowledge that we can have. And when we've applied this knowledge to our everyday life, then we have wisdom. We say that wisdom is knowledge having been tried by experience, you see. So everything we do, our prayer, and when we pray, we don't try to have a business with our supreme being, saying, if you do this, I'll do that. No. If we pray for anything, we pray for acceptance of our humble offering, because this offering is allowing us to associate with our supreme being. And by associating with our supreme being, who is the most pure, the most quiet, right, the most still, we develop those qualities. Association brings about assimilation. So all our spiritual practice is centered in our supreme being. Our prayer, our sacrifice, our service, our right association, our meditation, everything is to help us always to think about our supreme being. And by thinking about our supreme being all the time, we're forcing those negative thoughts out of our consciousness, and we're preventing other negative thoughts from entering our consciousness. So in this way, our consciousness is purified. So as we said in the beginning, what is called mind, we call consciousness with thoughts inside of consciousness. So here we're purifying the consciousness, eliminating, neutralizing all those negative thoughts, all those thoughts that are contaminated with lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, and envy. When our thoughts are contaminated with that negativity, then our feelings are contaminated with negativity. You see, it's polluted. Our feelings are polluted. When the feelings are polluted, the willing is polluted. See, and when our feelings are polluted, our willing is polluted. So we suffer because of our own, for lack of a better word, dirty deeds. So we're simply reaping what we have sown. Here we call it the law of karma, and that the only thing we take with us at the time that we drop this body off is our karma. So we take another birth to reap what we have sown. So we are responsible for our own condition. Oftentimes, some of us might find it easier to find someone else to blame for our current conditions. But we say our current conditions are dictated, if you will, by the quality of thoughts that we had last lifetime that contributed to our feelings, willings, and doings. So what we receive in this lifetime is what we've made by our past thoughts. And our future is being made, so-called future, which is always now, we're making that right now with the kind of life that we're living, the kind of thoughts that we are generating from our own consciousness. You see?
Best way to quiet those thoughts, those rambling thoughts that go through your
consciousness.
What's the best way for that?
The spiritual practice. See, it's like if we have a jar, say a gallon jug, or a gallon bucket, or a bucket that one can see through. But we have a blue coloring in the jug. Now say we cannot move that jug. We cannot turn it over and pour the blue contents out. But we want clean, clear water in the jug. But now our Supreme is infinite purity. So as we associate with our Supreme, since we can't turn over the jug, since we can't dip that water out, but we do have an infinite source of, say, quote unquote, pure water, pure consciousness, pure intelligence, we can continue to pour into that jug. What happens? We just gradually, all that blue water is displaced by the constant increase of clean water introducing the clean water into the jug. So like this, the more we pour association of our Supreme Being into our consciousness, by virtue of associating with our Supreme Being, we gradually clean all those contaminated thoughts out, and at the same time we prevent those other thoughts from entering. Gradually, our consciousness is radiating nothing but purity. Energy, frequency, vibration of our consciousness is purity. So any of those negative thoughts, those contaminated thoughts, they're really neutralized. And we say that these thoughts never stop moving throughout the universe. So these positive thoughts can eliminate negative thoughts in the whole universe. So this way we can work for the good of the whole universe while we're purifying our own being. And so those really high souls don't really have to talk at all. The whole vibration, the aura, we call it the aura, or the electromagnetic field that we're currently vibrating, it becomes so pure and it vibrates. Positive frequency, positive vibration, it's positive energy. So that positive energy never stops moving in the universe. So you do a lot of good in the universe by just being in it. It has an effect on the weather. It's all energy, frequency, vibration.
Should you try to isolate yourself from external factors, external forces around you?
Well, you want to.
As much as possible.
Well, you will. But your main thing that you want to do is associate with Supreme, no matter where we are. I know you heard about Naga Siddhartha Maharaj in Bombay. His home, his little apartment was in downtown Bombay, up in a little lane, up in a little alley. You had to climb the steps to get up to it. But people found our way to it. So there was noise all around him. But you have infinite, the nature of the self is infinite peace. So you can associate with this infinite peace no matter where you are. And this is the nature of our Supreme Being. So the more we associate with Supreme Being, the more we're purified. And that doesn't depend on any kind of particular location that we're within. The main business is to associate with the Supreme. And so as you associate with the Supreme, but naturally you want righteous association, wise association. You naturally move toward that kind of association. And you kind of move away from those who of negative vibration. But your business is to be of help to everyone out there, because everyone is suffering. In fact, we say we can see the beauty of the material world, so-called material world, because it's the material world itself is pervaded and transcended by the spiritual world. So the more we relate as being in the spiritual world, the more we can see the beauty of the material world. Because this beauty is all around us, but it's the way we are. If we're negative, full of negative vibration, and this is what we'll see in the world. But the more we are purified, our thoughts, our consciousness is purified by virtue of associating with the most pure, then all around us we see and associate with purity. So it comes down to purification of consciousness. And the way, the service, the offering, the surrender, the submission is synonymous. But your surrender, your offering, your submission is to your Supreme Being. And the main reason we're doing this is to help us to always think of our Supreme Being, and always thinking of our Supreme Being, we are associating with our Supreme Being. And association brings about assimilation. It's a matter of associating with the Supreme Being. It's like our Supreme Being is at the center of all we're thinking, feeling, willing, and doing. The whole process is to always think about our Supreme Being, to remember our Supreme Being. And this is association. So associating with the pure help us to be, engenders our own personal purification. So by calling out the name, offering everything, seeing the self as spirit, the revolution is to change the way we look at ourselves. So when we're looking at ourselves as spirit, or that pure energy, I'm looking out through the body from what we call the third eye, or the pineal gland, which is the real eye. The eye of discernment, some scriptures call it. But actually right now I'm looking from here out through these two external eyes. And so for the self, there's never birth nor death. Not having once been, it never ceased to be. So the self is in quality one with the Supreme Self. And so the goal of this endeavor, the goal of life, is to reawaken to our unity with the Supreme Being. So this is really what the real definition of yoga is: yoke, a union. So the goal of yoga is union, because really we're never not united with our Supreme Being. But the illusion is the illusion of separation. So by purity, by associating with the Supreme Sober, the Supreme Sanity. So we say our Supreme Being is the Supreme Sanity. By associating with the Supreme, the most awake one, the most clever one, the most profound one, the best planner, right? The best organizer, see? By associating with our Supreme Being, who is the source of all intelligence, omniscience, the source of all intelligence. So by associating with our Supreme Being, we reawaken to gradually more and more intelligence. So with this intelligence, we can better navigate through the intricacies of what we call life. So it's really priceless. It becomes with always remembering your Supreme Being. So whether we believe in a Supreme Being or not, we have to admit, I think most of us would admit, there is an intelligence driving all these forces out here. So we come to the understanding, knowledge, and experience that our Supreme Being is the source of all intelligence. It's the source of all bliss. In fact, at some levels we call it Satchidananda. But at a higher level, what some people refer to as Kundalini, we call it Sat Ananda. It's just the bliss of now, the bliss of the self. So when one is into the bliss of the self, one is beyond knower, one is beyond knowledge, one is beyond knowing, and one is beyond known. Beyond knower, knowledge, knowing, and known. We can remember it, but when we're in it, it's just the bliss of the self.